Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the TV studios of the State University of Milan. I'm Federico, and here is my colleague Susanna. We are both students of the Journalism School of Milan. Today, we are really proud to have here with us Michael Slaby, Chief Integration and Innovation Officer for Obama for America 2012 campaign. So, Mr. Slaby, welcome to Milan, and thank you very much for coming.
Thank you very much for having me here.
Okay, today we're going to discuss with Michael Slaby about a few very important issues such as technology, communication, and journalism. The public, the audience, will be asking a few questions to you, Michael. And if you see them with their mobiles, they're not messing around, but they're tweeting. And by the way, speaking of Twitter, let's see our colleagues over there, the Twitter desk, Vincenzo and Giuliana.
Thank you, Susanna. Good morning, everyone. I am Vincenzo, and with my colleague Giuliana, we are here to stream this conference on Twitter. We are about to tweet both in English and Italian, and we are going to use two hashtags. The Italian one is Piazza Digitale, and the English one is Changing Politics. On my back, on the LCD panel, as you can see, our tweet wall is populating with the real-time feedbacks, and we will keep you updated with upcoming information from the internet. So that's all, Federico.
Thank you, Vincenzo. So, Mr. Slaby, thank you again for being with us. Now our special guest will introduce himself, and then we will start the interview.
Thanks very much for having me. I'm very excited to be here in Milan. My name is Michael Slaby. I was the Chief Integration and Innovation Officer for Obama's 2012 campaign. Back in 2008, I was also the Chief Technology Officer of the first campaign from 2007 to 2008. So I have been in and around the Obama family and what we've been doing with digital media and technology from the very beginning. Should I jump into my presentation?
Yeah, please.
Sure.
Thank you very much.
Great. I think this is an amazing opportunity to have a really great conversation about sort of what's going on in the media world, what's happening with technology, and how journalism plays into that landscape. I want to spend the first 5 or 10 minutes talking a little bit about the landscape that we live in and sort of the world that this campaign took place in is very different than what happened in 2008. And then spend a little bit of time talking about some of the actual technologies and tools we used, and then get into a conversation with you guys about what's happening and what this means for the future and where we're headed, where communications is going, how technology plays into all of that, and the role of social media in empowering communities for political campaigns and technologies and companies and the public at large. So as we think about the world that we live in from a media perspective, and technology drives a lot of what we thought about what was possible for the 2012 campaign, and forced us to make a lot of changes in how we thought about technology, how we thought about media, how we thought about digital strategy in very different ways than what we experienced in the 2008 campaign, which seems so recent, but in a lot of ways was a whole nother world. The media landscape that I think we're most comfortable with and I certainly sort of grew up with was this idea of 3 very distinct, separated, unintegrated channels of communication, with paid media and advertising in one bucket, the earned media world with press and journalism in another, and the owned media landscape of self-published materials, our own websites, those kinds of channels, as very separate things. They were managed separately. Our organizations were set up to communicate them and produce media for them in totally disintegrated ways. And it didn't require a lot of integration as us as an organization, because the channels didn't mesh in any way. What we saw with the advent of the rise of the internet and things like blogs, more cable channels, more television opportunities, was the sort of fragmentation of the media landscape that there's still a lot of talk about. And that's what we see here in this middle column. Even with that fragmentation, there wasn't a lot of integration between channels. The channels themselves became more complex. Our jobs individually became more complicated, but it still didn't force us to really change our behavior in any meaningful ways. We started to see more individual publishing in the owned space. We saw the beginnings in the advent of the social media landscape but not the ubiquity that it has now, particularly in the American media landscape. The world I think we lived in, we've moved beyond this concept of fragmentation into what I often refer to as a network of networks, and this is a phrase you hear a lot. And I think what we see now is, with the ubiquity of platforms like Facebook and Twitter, we see all of these fragments that had spread apart being brought back together into a sort of messy, unified melange of old fragments of old channels and interconnected by social behaviors. And so we can no longer control. We may produce media for one place, but it's being viewed and seen in another. Twitter and Facebook interlink news media and television advertising in ways that are hard for us to impossible for us to control, really. And it's for us as a political campaign, and this is an important lesson for a lot of organizations that I work with, is it's an opportunity to empower people to embrace and interact with your organization in new ways and in new places where you hadn't envisioned. And rather than seeing it as something to be afraid of and something to try to control, which isn't going to work, and we've tried, it's something to embrace. And what it forces of us is this massively integrated landscape forces us to rethink how we organize our communication functions, how we organize our entire organizations. And that's how I ended up with this crazy title, Chief Integration and Innovation Officer, which is sort of a mouthful. It sounds like somebody read too many Harvard Business Review articles and started throwing together all these words that don't seem to be connected. But the point is that digital strategy and technology have to be integrated into all of the functions of our campaign. And the traditional, inside of a campaign, we raise money, we mobilize, message, money, and mobilization are the three things we often talk about. Communications plays a massively important role in politics. Mobilizing volunteers and the way we operate a very community-centric, neighborhood-centric community organizing model in the Obama campaign is another big piece. And then fundraising and raising money is essential in all kinds of channels. And that all of these pieces are tightly integrated into one whole was what my role was really about. And bringing a sort of new sense of integration across our entire organization. When we talk about the other thing that this more integrated landscape requires of us is a more intense connection to our values as an organization. It forces us, because we can no longer tailor messages to a single audience and expect that message to stay inside that audience. It forces us into a better sense of consistency, a better sense of integration and coherence about our message to all the audiences we need to address. And that forces us to think much more coherently and carefully about this progression that I think is really important when we think about what made the Obama campaign so effective and what makes really efficient, effective, inspiring, empowering organizations work well and communicate well, is this relationship between our values, the mission that we're setting out to accomplish, the strategies that we're going to use to accomplish that mission, and the tactics that we use to empower people to participate in that strategy. Values are simple, but it's not something that enough organizations spend enough time really articulating in a coherent, consistent way. It's about who you are and what you believe. It's beyond, you hear a lot of companies and brands, they talk about value statements, and they have these pages on their website that say, we believe in honesty and integrity. That's nice, that's wonderful. And I think we should all agree that those are good things, that it's good to be a good person, but what do you believe? Right? Let's take as a given that you want to be a good and honest and have a person with integrity. Let's take that as a given when we start working in the world and start talking about what do we believe about our country? Where do we want to go? What is important for our country moving forward in the 21st century and for the rest of the world? What does it mean to empower and regrow our middle class in the United States? What does it mean to provide social safety nets in ways that empower people instead of force across the entire spectrum of our society? And being really explicit and really clear about the values behind those things means that as new issues come up and new things arise, our decisions become simpler because we know who we are. Right? When you are working in an environment that is as incredibly fast and a media landscape that has been accelerated by Twitter, You don't have time to have a meeting about what you're about every time something comes up. You need to know. And everybody in your organization needs to understand that, so that when you start talking about what you're trying to achieve, everything that you're thinking about is infused with a consistent sense of who you are and what you're trying to do. And this sense of mission becomes really important. The second part of this equation around how you define success is something that in a presidential campaign, this is actually very simple. When we talk about what we're trying to achieve, we have a binary result. We're either going to win or we're going to lose. And we know that it's going to be determined by votes at the end of the day. The metrics of a political campaign at the highest level are actually really simple. But for an organization or a company, this can get really complicated. And it's important to spend time thinking through, what does it mean to succeed? If you work for a nonprofit or you work for an advocacy organization that's working on an issue like human rights, what does it mean to be successful? What does it mean to make progress on that issue? What is the relationship between the program that you're running today and the program that you're going to be running next year? And having a consistent sense of measurable goals, I had talked about that here, is really important. We have to understand what it means to succeed in a quantifiable way so that we know whether we're doing well. I had a really great conversation with a nonprofit that I work with in Chicago the other day. It's a small advocacy group that helps support people at high risk for cancer. And they run these series of really exciting fundraising events. And Lindsay, my friend, was saying, these events are so great. They help our organization every time we do them. And I said, how do you know? And the room went quiet. No idea. How does this help? And I have no doubt that these events are incredibly helpful, and they draw money and people into the organization, but they haven't thought through, what does it mean to succeed? What does more people being involved in their organization, how does that relate to the problem they're trying to solve, right? It's not enough to just build buzz. It's not enough to just build community. You need to be working towards something and giving people a sense of mission and giving people a sense of purpose and a role in what you're trying to achieve. And so if you don't know how you're getting from A to B, the people who are getting involved in your community aren't going to know either, and they're going to get bored. You're going to inspire them and then leave them flat with no opportunity to actually engage. That's when we start talking about strategies. Strategies are about programs, and they're about action. Every time we engage a community, every time we engage our audiences, we need to give them something to do. We need to give them a role in what we're trying to do. When we talk about the Obama campaign, we believe at our core, at a very fundamental level, and this comes directly from the president's own experience as a community organizer, in the power of people organizing their own communities, of taking a role in moving their own country forward, and not just handing power off to a mysterious authority, but being part of the process. And so it means that all of the programs that we do, whether they're about fundraising or about field organizing or about voter contact, every little action has to mean something in the context of the bigger picture. And it's up to us as an organization to articulate that well. How does it, we have, in our campaign, we had 700,000 volunteers working on the campaign. And a lot of what we do, a lot of what we believe is about people talking directly to other people, either via the phone or knocking on doors. And those one-to-one conversations are an incredibly powerful way to persuade people, to turn people out to vote, to get people engaged in the process. But it's hard as an individual volunteer to understand the connection between what's one phone call in the grand scheme of a country of 300 million people, and there are going to be tens of millions of voters. What does my one phone call mean? And giving people a sense that one phone call in your precinct might be the difference between winning that precinct and losing that precinct. And that one phone call might lead to another volunteer who makes another phone call. And that phone call might lead to another donor that leads to another dollar, that leads to another team. And that all of these things are interconnected in a way that leads towards the votes we need to get to. At the end of the day, all of our programs and strategies are measured in the one question: how does this help us win? We would have this conversation all the time. How does this lead to more votes? What's the relationship between what we're doing and where we're trying to go? And that clarity is where we get good engagement, where we get people with a sense of ownership, a sense of drive and passion, that they know they're part of something, that they understand that their role in the organization is valuable and meaningful and helping move the country forward. And then we start talking, when we get to tactics, and this is where, when I talk about values, mission, strategy, tactics, most often the conversation starts with tactics, which is a huge challenge, right? People want to say, well, what are we going to do with Twitter? What are we going to do with Facebook? And my first question always, well, why do you want to do those things at all? What are you trying to do? Let's start at the top of this equation and work our way back down. But these tools and platforms, like some of the things that we built ourselves on the campaign, like Dashboard versus open platforms like Facebook and Twitter, this is where people really get empowered. And this is one of the amazing things about the technology aspect of the landscape that we live in, is that not only are our media forms more integrated and more unified than they've ever been, we have a greater capacity to not just deliver media and messages to people in all kinds of new ways, but to deliver actual functionality. Actually give people tasks and things to do that are meaningful all the way to the edges of this network, whether that's through Facebook apps, whether that's for the applications that we build into our website or mobile apps that we put on people's phones, right? This is an amazing concept, the idea that a volunteer at a door knocking on their neighbor's door can have not just a script, not just something static that they've printed out that they're going to talk to, but the ability to tailor their conversation to what the person they're talking to is most interested in, because we can give them better functionality in their hand than they've ever had before. This concept of functionality at the edges and empowering what we often talk about as the second circle. So you have a group of people who are part of your organization. They're your dedicated, diehard volunteers, and we have this concept of neighborhood teams in our campaign. And those are the people that are closest to you. That's the first circle. But those people are connected to a massive network of people, right? In the United States, and we have this huge, the president is very popular on social media, and we have this huge community of millions of Facebook fans. Those millions of people are connected to almost the entire voting age population of the country. And so that power, there's an immense amount of power in the connections between the first circle and the second circle. And it's important for us to think about not just what are we saying to the people who support us, but what are we empowering them to say and do to engage the people that are one ring out from them. And driving a lot of the tools and the platforms that we talk about and the sense of empowerment that we talk about is about that, is about the power of that second circle. So when we think about about the Obama campaign in 2012, what was different and what did this shift in the ubiquity of social media mean for the campaign this time around? In 2007 and 2008, these platforms were brand new. Twitter and Facebook were still pretty young. Facebook only had less than 100 million users worldwide. Twitter was only a year or so old when the campaign, or months old, I think, when the campaign first started in 2007. And so these were places for us to reach new voters. These were places for us to experiment with new ways of engaging, but they had nothing like the ubiquity that they have now. And so what that meant for us is that not in 07 and 08, what we did was elevate the importance and the centrality of digital to everything that we did with communications. What we were able to do in 2012 in this integrated landscape that was driven by our campaign manager, Jim Messina, who constantly pushed us to break down silos and communicate better inside the campaign, was to build technologies and use analytics in as integrated a way into all of those departments as possible. So rather than technology and data being something on the side, an independent aspect of the campaign that was totally separate from the other things, we wanted to build that into everything that we were doing so that everything, all of our field organizing, all of our fundraising was more efficient and more effective and more intelligent than it had been in the past. And integrating engineering and technology allowed us to take advantage of this huge opportunity that we had. As the incumbent president, we had a whole year to think and to plan and to build before the campaign really became competitive. And that was a massive advantage for us. This ability to look at the challenges that we've had, this sort of separation between the offline and the online world that we suffered through in the 2008 campaign and tried to do some integrations with, but never really achieved it. We had the chance to sit down and spend a year building a whole platform dedicated to the connection between what was happening online, people's energy and signing online petitions, following the president, retweeting things, and what was happening offline, people in neighborhoods, meeting face-to-face, talking in small groups, going door-to-door, and that work is all part of one organizing ladder of engagement, that people can come into the campaign in from all kinds of directions and be connected to one set of work, so that we don't force what we tend to do when we live in silos and our organizations are operated as silos. Is what we force is our end users, the supporters of the campaign or the customers of our company, they have to figure out our org chart. and they don't care about our org chart. What they want to do is they want to be part of politics. We've made them this promise that they're going to be part of something important and part of something historic. And whether that's engaging as a volunteer one day, maybe as a donor another day, maybe as a sort of digital enthusiast retweeting the next day, that should be part of a single unified experience of them being a supporter of the president. What that requires of us is that we can integrate on their experience on the back end. And we spent a lot of our time working on a platform that we called Narwhal, which was just a code name, something that we could use to talk about this. But it has gotten a lot of attention and a lot of press because it's a funny name mostly. That's okay. We had lots of animal names for our products, so I'm not sure why. It just sort of became a joke in the office. Who could come up with the most ridiculous code name for a product that we were building? It became sort of a funny thing. But the concept of Narwhal was really simple. It was the engine to drive the integration between all of these teams. Because if you think about the old world where we had all these independent departments engaging in independent ways with people, they also had their own tools. So they had their own data sets. And none of these things talk to each other, right? This was part of the problem of trying to get the field team to work well with the digital team is the platforms that the guys and the field organizers use to do voter contact and to work on scripts and conversations and walk lists and the kinds of things that we use for calling and canvassing in American politics. That was a totally different set of systems than what we use to do email or to do online petitions or to manage our Facebook and Twitter followers. And so the purpose of Narwhal was to let those things talk to each other. It was very simple. It has sort of been concocted into this mythical, amazing thing that we devised, but it was really building our own infrastructure to match what we see in the world, which is this massively integrated, unified way that people engage all kinds of media and all kinds of platforms every day. And we wanted our supporters to have the same kind of experience with the campaign. And it allowed us to build all kinds of products from Dashboard, which I mentioned, which was our way of knitting together the online and the offline worlds, to a really smart system called Targus, which was the ability to if you were interested in supporting the campaign, you could connect your Facebook account to our app, and we could tell you who in your friends lived in a battleground state, who of your friends aren't registered to vote. And these are instead of just saying, share this with your friends and hoping that you guess right, we can actually help empower you to be more effective. You don't necessarily know whether your friends are registered to vote or not, but we can help you. And it was an amazing way to make people more effective. People want to help. People want to be part of driving this mission forward. They're active and they're doing kinds of work every day. And giving them more efficient and more effective ways to do that work was a big part of what these applications were about. So here's where we talk about some of the results. And I start with votes for a reason, because we won. In the end, this is a binary outcome for us, right? The President Obama now gets the opportunity to have a second term and continue serving the American people. And everything we did had to be in driving towards votes. And so these programs, when we talk about targeted sharing on Facebook, one of the things that we found is 600,000 of our supporters targeted 5 million of their friends just in the last weeks of the campaign. And we won some of the state. We won Florida by 70,000 votes. It's a state of millions of people. So each one of those 5 million contacts between the second circle were incredibly valuable. Our overall vote share was, we won by about 5 million votes, incidentally. Now, this doesn't mean that Facebook won the election. It was just a part. It was a piece, an important piece in the way that people were empowered to engage for the campaign and do work that led us to votes. But all of those things matter. In a really close election, this was a really tight election in every state that we won. All of those little those little advantages, those little bits of more efficiency for our volunteers. Every hour that our volunteers work where they make 50 voter contacts instead of 40, that's the difference between winning and losing in Ohio. And that was the difference between winning and losing in this campaign. So the last some of the big picture thoughts to think about, and then I want to open this up and get the discussion started, is to start off with is this question of values, is be who you are and only who you are. There's a really important, in a world where you can be exposed so readily and so easily for trying to be fake, and authenticity is so essential to effective communication in a world that is more transparent and moves so fast. largely because of Twitter, but because of all of this interconnectedness. That a consistency of who you are and who you're trying to be, and a humility about your own limitations is incredibly important. We will discover, Beppe Severnini talked about Twitter as a lie detector last night, and I think that's a very smart idea, that you will be found out. And being authentic requires a humility that is often uncomfortable for organizations, but it's really important as a place to start. And the second takeaway here is always to understand success in a really as granular a way as is possible for your organization or for the mission you're trying to accomplish. Understanding the relationship between your work and where you're going is important for giving your team meaning, and is important for giving your volunteers purpose. And there is nothing that sort of fades inspiration, like feeling like you're toiling and feeling like you're working in vain and what you're doing isn't important. And so making sure that the things you're asking people to do are valuable and that there's a clear connection between that and your outcome is really important. And the last part is to do only what matters. This is obviously connected to understanding success. But doing what matters is about the fact that even in a huge presidential campaign with thousands of staff and millions of dollars, we don't have enough time or enough money to do everything we'd love to do. We have all kinds of ideas every day. And some of those ideas are wonderful, but they have nothing to do with what we're trying to do, what we're trying to accomplish. And so making sure that we can be critical and intelligent about what we don't do and about what we don't waste time on, because we always work in a resource-constrained environment. I spend a lot of time not just working in politics, but working with nonprofits like the cancer organization I was talking about. And these organizations are always small, and they always wish they could be doing more. And so we're taking the extra time to understand at a quantitative level what's going to get you to the problem you're trying to solve. What gets you to your answer is about being the most effective version of who you are and what you're trying to achieve. And so understanding what matters most and staying focused on those things and disciplined about doing those things was one of the things that made the Obama campaign so successful. In 2008, that was really driven by our campaign manager, David Plouffe, and our campaign manager, Jim Messina, this time around, had that same incredible sense of purpose and focus that he gave us on a daily basis as sort of our day-to-day leader of what are we trying to achieve, and that we are on the right path. It's very easy. The other thing that this unified media landscape offers us is an incredible opportunity to get distracted. It is very easy to get pulled off into an argument that isn't helping the organization, or into a topic that you don't want to be talking about, or sort of distracted by what I like to call shiny object syndrome, which is there's some new platform and we need to be on Pinterest this week all of a sudden. That might be true for your organization, but it might not, and it's okay if it's not. And that kind of discipline is something that is really important to success in a world that's this complicated and where there are this many, I don't want to call them problems, this many opportunities to engage. So with that, let's open this up and start into the conversation about what's next.
Okay. Thank you, Michael, for your presentation. And I was looking through your profile, your LinkedIn profile, and I found out something really interesting. You have a Bachelor of Arts degree at Brown University, and but it's not that random. I mean, yesterday at a conference at State of Milan, at the University of Milan, you used this metaphor by saying you campaign in poetry, but you govern in prose. And can you explain it to us?
Sure.
Today?
So it is a little, my academic background is a little unusual for somebody who works in technology. I was a literature major, but I spent a lot of time studying biochemistry, which also has nothing to do with technology. But I think curiosity is important in general, and I think when people ask me what are the most important skills to being good at digital strategy, I always say learning how to write. Being so much of what we do and how we engage people has to do with telling good stories, right? And producing a narrative that makes sense for people and that is engaging and inspiring and is crafted to stir people. And so writing is an incredibly important part of everything we do. The value, Joe Rosbars, who was our chief digital strategist on the campaign, is one of the best writers and one of the smartest strategists I've ever worked with. And those two facts, I think, are related. Right? His ability to tell a story is part of what makes him so exceptional at what he does. For me, we were talking about the difference between using social media for campaigns and using social media in government to serve citizens. And I think it is in some ways more challenging because government is sort of less exciting in a lot of ways. We get very consumed, especially in American politics, with the power and the urgency and the poetry of the campaign. But there's this famous saying in American politics that we campaign in poetry, but we govern in prose. And this is about the mundane reality of serving others. And sometimes the issues, figuring out a more fair way to produce a more fair tax code is not as sexy and interesting as giving an epic, stirring speech about the future and hope for a new generation. But that's where the hope gets put to work. And that's where people's lives get better, which is what the hope is about in the first place. And so being able, we were talking last night, one of the people talk a lot about the power of social media for marketing, for selling products. The other thing that social media, to continue this metaphor, social media is incredibly effective for in the sense of a company, is for customer service. And that's what government ought to be about, right? It ought to be about serving citizens. And so the ability to respond and listen at all the way down to the individual level is something that social media gives us that's really hard to do at scale without it.
Thank you. Okay, so we're here at the University of Milan, and we're going to discuss your presentation and your work with my colleagues of the Walter Tobagi Journalism School. And they're going to ask you questions about topics such as technology, communication, and journalism. And after you hear 3 questions, more or less, and after you have a few minutes to answer. Okay, is there any question? Okay.
Hi, my name is Georgia. My question is, mass communication is turning more and more into individual communication. What are the consequences on the political content of the message?
I think that's a great question. I think the personalization of media is a huge opportunity. I think that there's another a famous quote in American politics from a House Speaker in the 80s that all politics is local. I think that's actually not quite true anymore. I think all politics is personal. What drives you might be different than what drives your best friend. And the things that are most important to me might not be, I might be really passionate about the relationship between the U.S. government and international human rights. That's not a local issue. That doesn't have anything to do with my neighborhood in Chicago necessarily. And so thinking about what makes each person tick and what is most important to each person that we engage with is an opportunity. It's also a huge challenge. And we talk about it in the campaign in the context of a phrase from Tim O'Reilly, who's a famous internet thinker and publisher in the United States, the concept of micro-listening. And it's not just, there's a lot of talk in American politics about micro-targeting, which is about sort of our ability to segment people into groups and target individual messages. But more important, and I think what often gets missed about social media is the power of dialogue, right? The ability to listen to what you are most interested in and to try to respond. And I think that ability to respond to what we hear is what is new and what is challenging for organizations, rather than just sitting back and thinking about how we want to engage and what do we want to say, thinking, what do you want to hear? And how does that relate? And the important part of this, and I think it's a place where organizations and political campaigns can get tripped up, is that doesn't mean you say what everybody needs to hear. What that means is that you have to figure out the relationship between what you believe and how you're going to inspire each individual person. You can't allow sort of the ability to listen to millions of voices make you say millions of different things. You still need to you still only get one sense of self. You as an organization or as a candidate, you can only be one person. And so when you talk to individuals, you may focus on the issues that matter most to them, but you still have to have one set of policies and one view of moving in the context of politics, one view of how we're going to move the country and the world forward. And so I think what it requires of us, I think the challenge for us is that it requires us to be more responsive to our audiences, which I think is new. I think we, in most media professionals are most comfortable talking, not listening, which is an interesting thing to think about, right? The power of being a good listener as an organization. And I think the second part of that is being able to adapt and personalize messaging without losing your center, right? And without reimagining yourself for every conversation, because you're just going to get exhausted. And you're not going. It's not going to be authentic, right? And people see through that. People see through that lack of genuineness very quickly. And in a world where every message is saved and stored forever, you have to stay consistent. And we all evolve. This is one of the amazing things about humans and about societies is that our opinions change over time, and we get wiser and we heal divisions that have occurred. But those evolutions have to be honest and they have to be genuine, and they can't be just about trying to please everybody we hear.
Hi, I'm Anna. I was wondering, talking about individual communication, if it makes politics more trustworthy rather than mass communication. Thank you.
More trustworthy? Yeah. I think it can. I think more transparency in most government and most political areas is better. I think involving more people in the process and being on. I think one of the dangers, certainly in American politics, is we tend to underestimate the intelligence of the electorate. We tend to try to oversimplify things. People are smart. People are willing to listen in ways that we don't often credit them with. And I think that it's important that we take the opportunities that these things afford us. We had a debate a little bit last night about whether Twitter and things moving so fast is actually good for political discourse. Is it, when you speak in 140 characters, is that enough? Is that enough to make, a lot of the issues that we're talking about, we're talking about public diplomacy, or we're talking about international politics, are more complicated than you're going to fit in 140 characters. And that's okay. That doesn't mean we shouldn't communicate, and that doesn't mean that these things can't be powerful. What it means is that in the context of the campaign is we spend a lot of time using these platforms for interactivity and to listen and to engage in a much more real-time way. But we have hundreds of pages of policy documents on our website where we can point people to, where we can be specific and thorough and nuanced. And those things are required. These issues are too complicated to be oversimplified. You can't write policy in tweets. You can engage that way. You can empower people that way. But you need to have a fuller sense of where you're going that's articulated in some way. I think that articulation is important. I think sort of the concept of Twitter as a lie detector and the concept of the pace. Twitter is interesting from a velocity perspective and how fast information moves. It's also interesting for how fast sort of conventional wisdom tends to congeal. One of the big parts of presidential campaigns in America are the debates, and we used to have a function inside the campaign called rapid response, which was about trying to figure out and trying to shape how the debate would be covered, how all the news would be covered. And they tended to used to worry a lot about what would happen on the cable news shows that night, but really what would the headlines be like the next morning? And now that's way too late. That's way too slow. Because by the time the debate is halfway done, all of the conventional wisdom about who's won is already locked in. And it happens on Twitter, and that conversation happens in public. And it requires the fact that the conversation happens in public, I think, is really powerful. And it's not that everyone in America reads all the tweets between our strategists and the reporters as these things are starting to happen in real time. But it means that it's happening in the open. And it forces us to be more courageous about taking positions and being opinionated in ways that I think are good. I think that a lot of times in politics we try to avoid taking hard positions because we want to please everybody. And I think being honest and straightforward is good for policy, and I think it's good for empowering people to make better choices. So I think there are lots of ways that more transparency and sort of some of this more speed actually helps politics.
Good morning. My name is Alessandro. You just mentioned the TV debates, and so I would like to know, after the first TV debate with Romney, did you make any change in your communication strategy in order to overturn the situation?
It's a great question. I think that that's where I think we were even a little surprised by just how much real-time response was necessary, and how much, as sort of good and disciplined as we were, I'm not sure we were as ready as we needed to be in terms of how we were engaging and how we were responding and how we were prepared to sort of make these sort of, to do this process out in the open. And I think the digital team with Joe and Teddy Goff, who was the day-to-day digital director and ran a lot of our social media response for the debates, made some really smart, good adjustments to just empowering more people to be part of that conversation, and for being more aggressive and being more courageous about being out and being open about that process. And I think it made our response as a campaign to the second debate a lot more effective than what happened in the first debate. I think I think it showed. I think it showed in the president's engagement and performance, and I think it showed in our campaign's ability to take advantage of the opportunity and to be more clear and be more out in the open about that conversation. So I think that's a lot of where we learned this lesson was between the first and the second debates, and I think we got a lot better. Sure.
Okay, thank you. We are happy to have here at TV studios of the State University of Milan, Mr. Michael Slaby, one of the digital gurus of Obama's 2012 campaign. Now let's talk a little bit about technology.
Right.
Mr. Slaby, you said once at the Berkman Center of Harvard that every presidential campaign is the most technologically advanced campaign. So, beyond this smart tautology, I would like to ask you something more about Dashboard, the online organizing community you have just briefly showed in your presentation. Someone has defined Dashboard as a holy grail for their campaign. Is this statement correct, or it is a little bit overemphasized?
Sorry, as a what for the campaign?
A dashboard, a holy grail, a sort of holy grail.
I think that might be a little overstated. I think my joke about how every campaign is the most technologically advanced is just that a lot happens in 4 years, and technology moves forward in all kinds of leaps and bounds. And so, if you're not as the last person to run technology for a political campaign, if I didn't oversee the most technically advanced campaign, I was not doing a very good job. And so that's mostly about the opportunity. And in terms of Dashboard being the holy grail, I think what it was our ability to engineer a solution to a very long-standing problem. As long as we've been sort of doing politics online, there's been this big separation between the offline and the online world. And it's a struggle to unify that experience. And I think one of the important innovations is that we were able to, because of the time and because we brought in a whole new class of technologists into the campaign. Our CTO, Harper Reed, and a lot of our engineers came from Silicon Valley and startup world. They didn't come from politics. Mm-hmm. And they brought a whole new attitude of different kind of problem solving, different types of, and a much higher level of technology than we'd had in the past. And that gave us the opportunity to build solutions to our own problems. Which is very, very powerful. That ability to sit down with our national field director, Jeremy Bird, and say, what is the challenge? What is hard about this? What will make your team more effective? And then build directly toward that solution. Rather than trying to cobble together something, and rather than a lot of political technology, I often say, is sort of put together with bubblegum and baling wire. And I think part of that is because our organizations move so fast and we don't have enough time, and there's so many, the primaries in America take a long time and they're extremely competitive. And I think in the 2008 campaign, we were at the mercy of that constant competition. And so we didn't have time to sit down and think critically about a solution like Dashboard. And I think what that time to build gave us was the ability to really go after this long-standing problem.
And solve it.
And solve it, yeah, which is good. I mean, I think about half of all of our volunteers use that platform, which I think is a really strong rate of engagement in terms of getting people into a totally new system and a totally new platform. And I think what we found as the campaign wore on is that the people who were engaged in their relationships on that platform were even more effective as volunteers than people who weren't.
So thank you very much for your answer. Do we have a couple of questions from our audience? Yeah, please.
Hi. I'm Maria Chiara. In an interview, you said you were about to get fired because of technological problems. What was the biggest technological challenge during the last campaign? Thank you.
It's a good question. I think that one of the biggest challenges about, and I'm talking about the power of innovation, the power of our ability to engineer solutions and bringing in all these new people, and I'm talking about all the good consequences of that. But the reality is that that's a very disruptive reorganization of what we're used to. And having a whole new type of thinking and a whole new type of person inside a campaign produces a really interesting internal cultural challenge between sort of what we're used to doing and what we're trying to do now. And I think a lot of any of that conflict that I was hinting at in that article, in that interview, was about sort of managing that new cultural challenge of solving problems in new ways, and our campaign manager pushing us to be more collaborative, which is challenging. You know, if you're used to operating campaigns because they go so fast or organized kind of like a disaster response. So you have these big silos of groups and they don't have to talk to each other and everybody just goes 100 miles an hour. And collaboration slows that down. And so I think that some of the challenge was taking the time to solve problems. And that sometimes, you know, problems, we used to have this sort of saying that if you can't do it in an all-nighter, you shouldn't do it. Which is incredibly untrue. I mean, that limits you to very short-term solutions. And we could never have built something like Dashboard in a night, right? It took months and months of thinking and process and wireframing and architecture, and embracing that challenge was a big risk and a big investment by our campaign manager in a new way of thinking. And I think there were moments where, you know, that was a little scary. I think there were moments where we weren't sure was Dashboard really gonna work? And I think we had confidence that we knew we could build what we were setting out to achieve. But there were definitely moments where it felt uncomfortable. Anytime you change, there's sort of that much of a shift and change going on. It's hard for an organization. And I think we weathered that pretty well. But I think it's that culture shift can be a real challenge for a lot of organizations.
Another question?
Hi, I'm Eva. 2008 was the year of social network. 2012, the year of big data. Can you estimate a development for 2016? Are you working on new projects?
That's a good question. I get asked about what 2016 is going to be like a lot, and I always say I have no idea. I think that at this stage of the game in 2008, in December of 2008, I don't think we could have predicted how important analytics were going to be and how far technology was going to advance. I think one of the things that the pure technical advancements that happened between 2008 and 2016 that made what we did with analytics possible was the advance and the incredible sophistication of cloud computing. We couldn't have built our infrastructure with physical machines. We couldn't have afforded it. It would cost tens of millions of dollars. And our ability to build in a flexible cloud-based way with Amazon Web Services was most of our infrastructure, gave us the ability to process and exchange data both at a speed and at a volume that we could not have done otherwise. And so as we look to 2016, I think there we can see hints of things that are starting to rise. I think one of the things that we saw starting to really come to fruition toward the end of this campaign was the importance of mobility. How much, almost 40% of all of our web traffic came in through mobile devices, whether tablets or smartphones. And I think that's only going to continue. And so thinking about sort of, and not about mobile programs, but about mobility, about media being consumed on the run, and about the importance of where people are to what they're doing. I think we've talked a lot in the States about location-based services, things like Foursquare and Gowalla. And I think those haven't really taken hold in politics yet, even though so much of politics is about geography. And so I think as mobility becomes more of a standard of sort of the first engagement point, location becomes more of a variable that there's an opportunity to take advantage of. I think the other technology that is going to become really important, and it's just a question of when. It has to do with augmented reality. I think that we're starting to see little bits and pieces of it in our daily lives. But I think the power of, we have this massive access to all of the world's information in our pockets. And we spend a lot, I'm in a whole new city. I've never been to Milan before, and I was wandering around yesterday afternoon, and the ability to do things like overlaying digital information on the things that I'm looking at and learning about La Scala while I'm looking at it is an incredible opportunity. And I think it's still sort of, some of those technologies are still just coming to fruition, but I think there's going to be an incredible power to the ability to overlay digital information on the physical world that's going to take the boundary between online and offline and kind of dissolve it completely. But that might not happen by 2016. We'll see where we go.
Okay, thank you, Michael, for your answers. And let's see if there is anything new on the Twitter desk. Juliana?
Thanks, Susanna. Three interesting tweets have just arrived. Lucia writes, I can't imagine a typical meeting with the president and his team. Whereas Gabriele writes that, Slaby, you studied English Lit and Biochem at Brown University. What did you keep from these subjects? Finally, Silvia writes, I'm wondering why GOP doesn't have such an art team. Michael?
I think the second one is interesting, sort of what I keep, and I talked about the importance of writing. When I think about the role of biochemistry and what I do every day, that's probably a bit more of a stretch. But I think one of the things that's becoming more important in our culture is that because things are more integrated, is people who can speak multiple languages and not just literally Italian and English, and I don't speak Italian, so it's probably a bad example. But the ability for me to speak both sort of communication language and the language of engineering is important. It makes me more effective at my job. It gives me more ability to understand the implications in sort of all of these interconnected places that I might be able to understand any other way. A typical meeting with the president is an amazing thing. I've only had a couple of opportunities to work directly with him, and he has an incredible mind and an incredible sense of the power of these tools to extend the values and the ideas that he believes in about community organizing are still the values that we operate under. But what he recognizes is the incredible power to achieve a reach and a scale of an organization that you could never reach without these tools. And he's given us a lot of opportunities and a lot of rope to run and experiment and innovate in ways. And I think his leadership and his willing to push on this is incredibly important to our ability to get where we've gone.
You didn't answer one question.
What was the third one? Sorry.
Why GOP?
Silvia writes, I'm wondering what GOP doesn't have such an art team.
I think that's a good question. I think one of the challenges that I mentioned that we had in 2008 was this incredibly long, complicated, competitive primary that took a long time. And it forced us into a very reactive posture. And I think the Governor Romney's campaign was in a very similar place. And I don't think they didn't have the time, the incredible luxury of time that we had to think and plan. They have a lot of smart guys on their team. I was just on a panel with a guy named Matt Lira, who ran a lot of the digital stuff for Congressman Ryan, who is the VP nominee, and runs the digital programs for Eric Cantor in the House of Representatives. And I think they have a lot of opportunities and a lot of really smart people on their side. And I think we had a luxury of the willingness to engage and build our own technology that was a risk they weren't able to take this time around. But I think when we look ahead to 2016 and beyond, I think we're going to see a lot more parity.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Slaby. And coming back to the technological issue applied to the journalism. Both in the United States and in Italy, and particularly here at Walter Tobagi School of Journalism, We are involved in a ethic discussion about the future of journalism in the digital era. In order to investigate such topics, we have founded a collective blog whose name is in Italian Piazza Digitale, in English is like Digital Square, in collaboration with Daniele Manca, who is vice editor of Corriere della Sera. So, we, as future journalists, we would like to know what we are going to face in the future. So, future journalists, raise some question and our expert will answer.
Hi, my name is Sylvia, and I was actually thinking about, well, you were talking about the ability not just to say what you want to say, but also what people want to hear. And your big data system has been very efficient in political communication. So I'm wondering if targeting readers and maybe analyzing what readers actually would like to read on papers, and also considering the mobility of information nowadays would be actually useful for journalism and a successful way to actually better communication between journalists and our readers.
I think that's a really good idea. I think that a willingness for journalists and for media companies to listen to conversations that are going on as a way of sourcing ideas and a way of sort of thinking about paths of inquiry, I think is almost any organization that communications is essential for, which is almost all. Not taking the opportunity to listen to the conversations that are going on around them is a huge missed opportunity for every type of organization, and it's just as true for journalism. I also think the other aspect of this for journalism, in addition to just sort of sourcing concepts and figuring out what issues are most important, where are points of inquiry that are needed in the public discussion, what are things that need deeper reflection and need more investigation. I think listening for those opportunities is incredibly important, but I also think journalists' willingness to engage their readers and viewers and listeners, depending on the medium that you're working in, and be part of a dialogue. I think journalists there is a sort of natural distance between the journalist and the audience that I think is breaking down. But I think that can be a good thing. I think it can force more discipline in us as journalists. I think it forces us to be more critical of ourselves and more careful with our own pace. One of the things that I think is an interesting challenge in the journalism world is things move so quickly, we are often incentivized to draw fast conclusions. And I think that a willingness to support those conclusions and continue to be part of a dialogue forces us to be more careful about the opinions that we. And I'm not suggesting that I think being opinionated is a good thing. I think avoiding clarity is a bad thing for almost all organizations. But I think the willingness to sort of stay in the conversation and be willing to engage with commenters and be part of. It's interesting if you look at large publications online. They always have big comment streams after the article. But how often do you see the author of the article in the comments? Never. Almost never. It's a huge missed opportunity. Why isn't that author part of that conversation? They started the conversation, right? This is just an ability for people to get closer to knowledge and to an exchange of ideas that I think is something that we have to take advantage of.
Hi, I'm Silvia. You are witnessing the development of journalism due to new technologies towards politics. What advice would you give to future journalists?
Don't be afraid that the media forms that we're used to change. So people ask me all the time about newspapers and whether, what does it mean that the printed word is changing. I love physical newspapers. I like physical books. I read books. I don't like reading on a Kindle. And I like reading the newspaper. I like it. But in the long run, delivering content by printing it out and shipping it all over the city and all over the world is a pretty inefficient way to deliver content. Like if you just think about it, it sounds crazy, right? We're going to print stuff on paper and send it around in trucks. It's like, why would we ever do that when we can deliver it? Why would we? The most expensive part of most newspapers is buying paper. That's crazy. So at some point, we're going to probably stop printing newspapers. But that doesn't mean we don't have newspapers, right? That doesn't mean that the role of an entity whose purpose is to provide transparency and provide openness and provide investigation into our public process and our public discourse isn't incredibly important. And I think that I have a good friend who's part of this discussion right now. He's helping remake one of our oldest magazines in the United States, The New Republic. His name is Chris Hughes, and he has very ambitious ideas. He was one of the founders of Facebook, so he's been part of sort of the evolution and the breakdown of traditional forms of journalism. But now he's engaged in trying to take a long-form, investigative, journalistic magazine and bring it into the 21st century. And I think in a situation where everyone can be a publisher and where decisions get made really fast, I think the importance of really high-quality, critical, professional, unbiased journalism is actually more important. And I think we have to avoid, the advice I'd give you is don't get bogged down in the details of the delivery mechanism. Like the fact that we're going to get rid of paper doesn't mean journalism isn't important. It might make it more important. You're very relieved.
Thank you very much, Michael. I have a sort of final question about the journalism's topic. So I do agree with your considerations. Talking about today, does the traditional press still have importance in political communication?
Very much so. I think one of the important innovations that might come up for 2016, and I didn't mention this before, but I think the political press plays a huge role in filtering and processing information for the general public. And I think one of the things that we need to do as a campaign need to do a better job is understanding the quantitative impact of that. We spend a lot of time thinking about the quantitative impact of TV advertising and the quantitative costs of doing online ads. And we think a lot about the ROI of social media, but we haven't figured out good ways of quantifying the impact of press engagement and the impact of earned media. But in an environment where all of these sort of interconnected networks, the blood of this network is content. And a lot of that content is produced by reporters. And so, a lot of my Facebook newsfeed is full of articles that other people are reading and that they want me to see or they want other people to see. And those are the starting points of a lot of this conversation. And the political reporters play a really important role, hopefully, at their best and at our best. And this is a system, this is a symbiotic system. For it to improve, we all have to improve, and we have a role in this too. But at its best, political reporting should be about keeping the debate about the things that matter most and keeping people informed about the things that matter most to their decisions. And I think that's a role that the political press takes very seriously. But I think in a media environment where sensationalism is sometimes too highly prized, and where news is too often about entertainment, we can get lost. The purpose of the press the free press has a very, very essential and important role in democracies working effectively. It's when we talk about failed states and when we talk about new democracies, one of the things that is most essential to a healthy public discourse and a healthy new democracy is encouraging and protecting the institution of the press. And so taking that role and that part of your job to heart, I think, is an important thing to believe in and instill and keep in mind.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you. Let's go back to the Twitter desk. And are there any news, guys?
I've collected that tweet from collective blog of political communication, and this is very interested about the new Republic experience. So I was thinking about how they're affording the question of digital rights in the era of Twitter.
Say that again? Sorry, can you just repeat?
The question of digital rights, how they're affording this.
Copyrights.
Rights. Sorry.
Copyrights.
I think, I think our trademark and patent system in general, sort of broadly, did not envision a world of software, did not envision a world of social media. We run into this challenge a lot during the presidential transition in 2009 when the Obama team was just figuring out how the White House was going to work. A lot of what our communications team is driven by the Presidential Records Act was written in 1979. And so definitely didn't envision email, definitely didn't envision Twitter. I think all of our concept of intellectual property needs to be rethought. And I think there's a lot of really good dialogue going on about this. I think that there are a lot of brilliant people, Lawrence Lessig, Tim O'Reilly in the United States are leaders in this debate about rethinking what does intellectual property mean in a digital age. I think when you think about a magazine and you think about the printed word, the ability and willingness to let your content travel through the network gives you more power. And so being willing to let go of control of where people consume your content is important to you being relevant. I think the challenge is that this requires us to come up with new business models. Our revenue can't be tied to people consuming our content in specific places if we want to have a role in this sort of ecosystem of media. And that's a big challenge for all of us. And I think it's something that all of these media companies are struggling with. And it's why spending so much money on paper is probably not a good idea. But we're going to keep doing it for a while because I like my newspaper every Sunday.
Speaking of challenges, in your LinkedIn profile, you say, I'm obsessed with saving the world. How is this working so far?
Well, what do you think?
I think you are ahead.
I think there are a lot of big challenges in the world. I think one of the things that has happened, more media and sort of more visibility into corners of the world that we couldn't see before has revealed there are a lot of places in the world that are still struggling. There's a lot of problems that need to be solved. And I think that one of the things that I spent a lot of my time thinking about is that I spent the last 5 years or so working on how technology and digital media can apply to electoral politics, but there are an awful lot of problems in the world that are more important than elections. Things like human trafficking, things like poverty, things like global health. And how can technology and how can digital media play a role in empowering people to solve those problems for themselves? As the developing world sort of skips all kinds of stages of technology and goes straight to a sort of mobile-first community, what does that mean for providing aid? What does that mean for helping refugees? What does that mean for global health? Those, I think, are the problems that I think coming into the next decade, the technology world and innovation has an incredibly important role in helping find solutions to some of these problems that have plagued us forever, but that are solvable now.
Thank you.
So a final question, more trivial question, it's my personal curiosity. In your LinkedIn profile, I found that between the period between May 2006 and August 2006, you were at the same time head waiter at the famous Oceanic restaurant in Chicago, and then product manager of the firm, the Strategy Group. Mm-hmm. So how could you combine these two stressing jobs?
So that's a good question. So I started when I had a career as a web designer and a web developer, and I'd started my own company. But I was always a passionate follower of politics. I grew up in Washington, D.C. But after the 2004 election, when President Bush won a second term, I decided I had to get involved in politics. But I was living in Chicago, and I wasn't quite sure how to get involved, so I went to work for Senator Durbin, who was our senior senator when President Obama was junior senator. But I was working for free. They didn't have a job for me, and I just went to work for free for a year, and so I was waiting tables to pay the bills. And that's how I got into politics, was sort of doing that. And I've had a lot of people ask me, I actually think working in a service job is really good training for doing digital media, because it teaches you how to engage in all kinds of communities. It teaches you how to say no. It teaches you how to do customer service, which so much of digital media is about.
Thank you very much, Michael.
Thank you.
Okay, it's time for our conclusion, and we like to thank you, Michael, for being here. We hope you enjoy your stay in Milan, the city and the university. But we would like to thank a lot of people. First of all, the University of Milan for this studio, this incredible studio. Second, our directors, Carlo, Giulia, Alexis, and Andrea, who work very hard. And the whole CTU staff who help us with the cameras, all that incredibly problematic stuff. And we like to thank our colleagues of the School of Journalism and all people from the Twitter desk, Davide Gangale, who is in charge of the streaming. You don't see him, but he's working for us. And I like to thank, Federico, who was with me, and you, Michael, and the audience at home. Thank you.